Chapter 1387. Belinsky happily went to see Yuan. First, he explained Tang Sheng's attitude. Then, he suggested that the moment Tang Sheng left the city the next day, they would seal the city and loot the entire city. They would take everything that could be used or taken away and quickly leave this place. They would return to Siberia to recuperate and prepare for the next battle. Yuan happily accepted Belinsky's suggestion. However, at the same time, he was also alarmed. This merchant was too cunning, so much so that he had to be wary. He even wondered if he could kill this merchant if he had the chance. When the time came, he would be able to obtain the merchant's wealth and avoid a huge danger. Wouldn't that be the best of both worlds? Unfortunately, Belinsky did not know this. He was still fantasizing about how he could expand his caravan in Siberia with Yuan's support. He even thought that without Akmu, Yuan would be in urgent need of talents. He should have the ability to take over this position. This was the difference between a merchant and a ruthless person. Merchants thought more about benefits and how to make use of each other in a win-win situation. Ruthless people were different. They mostly did things based on their hearts. Once they realized that there was danger, they would kill without any reason. As for the consequences, that was something to be discussed in the future. As for Tang Sheng, after receiving Belinsky's reminder, he began to gather his troops that afternoon. After bringing enough rations for 5 days, he bade farewell to his clansmen early the next morning and led his troops out of Archeng. Not long after he left the city gates were closed. At the same time, they began to loot. In order not to attract attention, there was no fire in the city. Everything that could be looted was looted, and those that could not be taken away were smashed. For a time, the city was in a mess. Even General Tang Sheng's residence did not escape. Belinsky personally led the army to charge in, and then there was a round of looting. Tang Sheng was a division commander. When he chased Chen Bo and the others away, he took a lot of good things. Now, they were all in the treasury. Now, Belinsky had benefited from them. When they saw the boxes of good things being carried out of the Tang residence, the clansmen who stayed behind to guard the residence could not take it anymore. They all went forward to stop these actions. This made Belinsky unhappy. Since he had decided to go all the way, he gave the order and the Mongol cavalry began to kill. Very quickly, the Tang manor was filled with blood and the stench of blood filled the air. Even after all of the clansmen had died, many of them still had their eyes wide open, as if they had died with a grievance. They really couldn't imagine that the person who came to the residence yesterday and was sent away by Tang Sheng with endless gratitude would suddenly reveal killing intent today and kill all of them. What exactly was going on? The chaos in all city also affected the intelligence personnel of the 5-star army in the city. However, because some of them were dressed like beggars and had no money, they did not attract the attention of the Mongolian soldiers. When the situation in the city became more and more chaotic, the intelligence personnel used a new battery that had just been sent into the city to turn on the radio and broadcast the situation outside. At this moment, Yang Chendong was leading his army towards Archeng. At this time, the number of troops had reached nearly 20,000. Apart from the 10,000 soldiers, there were also many Mongol captives as well as many Russian clansmen nearby. 3 battles, 3 victories, and Yang Chendong used his actions to prove the strength of the 5-star army. He also attracted the respect of some hot-blooded Russians like Nikolaev. They had even expressed their desire to join the 5-star army. Once they entered Archeng, they would be able to achieve their wish. This was Yang Chendong. No matter what the situation was, he could always make the troops grow like a snowball. In the end, they would become a colossus that would strike fear into the bones of all his opponents. As the army was advancing, the intelligence report from Archeng was sent over. When the telegram was sent to Yang Chendong, his first thought was that the enemy was about to run. Tell Commander Tianhu to come over immediately. The target had been exposed, so it was time to start a fire. Under the constant cooling, Chen Bo fell into a deep sleep once again. This time, it was different from the past. Chen Bo had really fallen asleep. His breathing was steady, and his body's vital signs were also constantly recovering. It was only a matter of time before his body fully recovered. As for the military matters of the Far Eastern Army, before Chen Bo fell asleep, he gave all the power to Commander Dai Qua. As the person who followed Yang Chendong to the Far East, Dai Qua had seen the strength of the five-star army. His loyalty to Yang Chendong was not something that the other commanders could compare to. Chen Bo was relieved to give the power to this person. After Dai Qua obtained the military power, the first thing he did was to take out the tiger talisman that Chen Bo gave him. He sent someone to inform the 3rd Cavalry Division and the 5th Cavalry Division. He also allowed Commander Kong He to return to the army and lead the 2nd Cavalry Division to gather at the military headquarters. Even if there are unstable elements in the army, it should only be a small part. It is time to expose them. Commander Dai Qua waved his hand and gave such a military order. There was nothing to be afraid of if there were pustules in the body. What was scary was that they did not dare to squeeze them out. Doing so would only make the problem worse. Since the 6th young master had already arrived with the army, even if these people jumped out, they would not be able to do anything. What was there to be afraid of? Out of his absolute trust in Yang Chendong, Dai Qua let the army assemble without worry. He wanted to see who would jump out and who would court death. At the same time, he also sent a report to Yang Chendong, informing him that the Far Eastern Army was not very stable and asking for reinforcements. Yang Chendong had thought a lot about the problem of the Far Eastern Army on the way here. Considering that he was entering alone, in order to expand the army, the political review of the source of soldiers was not so strict. As a result, there were all kinds of people mixed in. This was something he could understand. But understanding was not giving in. They ate his food and took his salary, but they wanted to rebel against his master. If he did not punish them well, where would the justice be? He handed over the task of getting rid of the traitors to Beta Persei and allocated 1,000 men from the 2nd Battalion of the Black Cavalry and 2,000 men from the 1st Cavalry Army. He wanted to deal with the unstable elements in the army with a thunderous force. Since he came to the Far East, a fortress like the first city would definitely be built here. After Beta Persei received the order, he quickly left with the army after Tian Hu left. Yang Chendong led the rest of the army straight to Archeng. It was already chaotic there. The earlier they arrived, the earlier they could end the chaos there. After Dai Qua received Yang Chendong's reply, he was full of confidence. The stage had been set up, and the next step was to see how those people with bad intentions would act. Tang Xing brought more than 8,000 men from the Far Eastern Army's 4th Cavalry Division to the military forest where Chen Bo was. What made people speechless was that this army was still wearing the military uniform of the 5-star army. This was also a helpless move. Although they surrendered to the Mongolian army with their division commander, the other party was too poor. They were so poor that they did not have any uniform at all. They had no choice but to gather here wearing the old military uniform. Wearing the military uniform of the 5-star army, they were now going to fight the 5-star army. The sarcasm was very obvious. The direct experience was that the morale of the soldiers of the 4th Cavalry Division was very low. Most of the soldiers' faces flashed with confusion. Not everyone was as ungrateful as Tang Sheng. These soldiers were all from poor families, and many of them were Russian men who had been bullied by the Mongolian cavalry. It was Chen Bo who had built Al City after arriving in the Far Eastern region. He gave them food to eat, so that they would not starve to death and did not have to worry about their safety. Although Chen Bo didn't bring the families of these soldiers to Al City for the sake of the overall stability of the situation, causing them to have a lot of worries in the future. However, their monthly wages were not little, and they were never late. With this money, they could buy some things in the city to support their own tribes. This was already something that made them feel very proud. Many warriors were still thinking that when the boys in their tribes grew up to be men, they would bring them to Al City to join the army, so that they could better support their tribes. However, they did not expect Tang Sheng to betray them. When they received the news, many of the soldiers could not understand, and no one was willing to rebel with him. However, it was at this time that Tang Sheng stood up, saying that once they and the Mongolian army took over Al City, they could bring their tribes into the city and live a good life together. It was because of this that the soldiers were appeased, and they had no choice but to stand together with their enemies, the Mongolian cavalry. Tang Sheng had indeed kept his promise. After successfully chasing Chen Bo out of Al City, he agreed to let the soldiers bring their tribes into the city. However, what no one expected was that the current arching was no longer the arching of the past. The city had long since fallen under the control of the Mongol army. The series of measures that General Chen Bo had set for the citizens had all disappeared, and no one followed them. There were many smashing, killing, robbing and pillaging within the city, and sometimes it was even more chaotic than outside. Under such circumstances, who would bring their own tribes into the city? Wouldn't that be like sending sheep into a tiger's den? It was also at this time that Tang Sheng stood up again, saying that the chaos would end soon. As long as the Mongols weren't stupid, Al City would return to peace. Everyone just needed to wait patiently, and Al City would become a true refuge for everyone. In order for this day to come sooner, they needed to eliminate the Far East army first. They had to get rid of this big problem first. It was under such circumstances that the 4th Cavalry Division left Al City, following Tang Sheng to 50 miles north of the city. They acted as if they were going to attack the Far Eastern Army headquarters. Tang Sheng, who had just arrived, met up with the Mongol commander, Uru, and learned that the Far East Army, which had been hidden for many days, was gathering here. Uru welcomed Tang Sheng's arrival very much. There were only 2,000 Mongolian cavalry here. Although they felt that their fighting strength was not bad, the Far Eastern Army was said to have tens of thousands of soldiers. In terms of numbers, the difference was still too great. Chapter 1388. Tang Sheng's arrival was not just a matter of increasing the number of soldiers by nearly 10,000. This person was once a division commander of the Far East Army and had many old friends in the army. If this matter was handled well, turning an enemy into a friend, how much help would he gain? General Tang, we will launch the attack tomorrow. When the time comes, both sides will be at the foot of the mountain. I hope that the general can use his glib tongue to gain merit before the battle. At that time, I will truthfully report everything I see to the Khan. Ulu said with a fake smile on his face. He was reminding and also warning Tang Sheng that tomorrow's battle was very important and that he must do his best. Your praise will also be known to the Khan. You must not miss such an opportunity to gain merit. Yes, this general understands. Tang Sheng cupped his fists and said with a very humble attitude. Although the other party was not as good as him in terms of numbers, the other party was a Mongolian general. In comparison, he was far inferior. He had no choice but to flatter the other party. Ulu left the tent, leaving Tang Sheng behind to think about some information about the officers of the Far Eastern Army. If he wanted to persuade those people before the battle, he had to do some homework in advance. This battle would also determine his position in Houlihan's heart. He did not dare to be careless in the slightest. Of course, if he knew that Houlihan had already abandoned him and fled, and that his mansion in Al City had long been robbed by the people he trusted, Belinsky, and the people he regarded as his life had also been killed, he probably would not have such thoughts now. At the same time, in the headquarters of the Far Eastern Army in the mountains, Dai Qua also contacted Beta Persei's reinforcements who had arrived at the periphery. When he knew that Beta Persei was already outside the mountains with 4,000 cavalry and could appear at any time, Dai Qua's heart was greatly relieved. He also began to look forward to the arrival of dawn. He wanted to see how many disloyal people there were in the army. He could take advantage of this opportunity to take them all down. The night would eventually pass. On the morning of the second day, both armies began to gather outside their respective tents as if they had discussed it beforehand. Both sides had their own thoughts, but with the same goal. They did not fight to the death right from the start. Instead, they arranged themselves in a formation, looking like they wanted to use their power to suppress the other party. The Mongolian army had over 10,000 cavalry. Adding the 3 divisions of the Far Eastern Army and 20,000 cavalry, they had over 30,000 cavalry. Fortunately, the open space under the mountain forest was not small. But even so, from afar, all kinds of flags fluttered high up in the sky and stood in all directions, giving off a boundless and endless feeling. It took nearly 4 hours, starting from dawn until the sun was high in the sky. Finally, the armies of both sides were in formation. Then, it was time for the commanders of each side to take the stage. As for the 5-star army, Chen Bo was still recovering, so he did not appear. The one who replaced him was Dai Qua. This was enough to show his authority from the fact that Chen Bo's guard captain, Xia Qian, appeared beside him. Other than Dai Qua, the 2nd Division's commander, Kong He, the 3rd Division's commander, Shi Xiaolin, and the 5th Division's commander, Wu Ba, all appeared with their respective cavalry. But what was interesting was that these 3 divisions were not gathered together. They maintained a certain distance between each division, giving off a sense of vigilance. In comparison, the Mongol army only had Tang Sheng, Ulu, and a few other generals at the front, and their numbers were much lesser. But the advantage was that they seemed to be united. More importantly, Tang Sheng was going to recruit them. This was the most important thing. This was because if this matter was done well, the military strength and morale of both sides would decrease while the other side would increase. It was even possible for there to be a reversal. After both sides were in formation, Tang Sheng rode out under General Ulu's signal. In the sudden silence of both camps, this action was too eye-catching no matter how one looked at it. As Tang Sheng leaped out of the formation, all kinds of discussions began to spread uncontrollably below. There were very few generals in the Far Eastern Army who did not recognize this 4th Division's commander. Especially this time, the Far Eastern Army had lost Al City, and it was all because of this person. This time, it was difficult to not recognize him. He was just a traitor. No one knew what he wanted to do. Could it be that he wanted to repent after seeing the strength of the Far Eastern Army? A few Far Eastern Army soldiers who did not know the truth thought like this. Only some officers who had other thoughts revealed an indescribable expression in their eyes. It was unknown whether they were happy, hesitant, or hesitant. Before Tang Sheng spoke, they probably hadn't made a final decision. Commander Dai, the traitor Tang Sheng has come out. Please allow this general to kill him. The head of the guards, Xia Qian, glared at Tang Sheng and clenched his fists when he saw him gallop out. His eyes were filled with hatred as he spoke. No rush, no rush. Let's wait and see. On the other hand, Dai Quo was not anxious at all. On the contrary, he was looking forward to the other party's performance. He wanted to see how many loyal generals and villains there were in the Far Eastern Army now. Dai Quo had no intention of stopping him. Even if the other officers wanted to charge and kill the enemy, they had no choice but to suppress their anger. They wanted to see what this Tang Sheng had to say. In the eyes of these brave people, if you did something wrong, you should be punished. Even if Tang Sheng said something, they would not easily forgive him. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Tang Sheng first swept his gaze over the Far Eastern Army. After recognizing many of his colleagues, he finally opened his mouth slowly. Everyone, I don't think I need to introduce myself. Everyone knows me. Yes, I am the traitor in the eyes of some of you. Just like that, Tang Sheng's actions caused another round of discussion to erupt from the two great formations. Everyone was discussing. They had never seen such a shameless person. He actually admitted that he was a traitor. Without waiting for the discussion to continue fermenting, Tang Sheng shouted again. But I want to say now, I am not a traitor. I am loyal to my tribe. Half of my blood is Mongol. The reason why I led the Mongol army into Archeng was to protect my tribe and continue to reproduce. What's wrong with that? Tang Sheng was almost shouting when he asked, "What's wrong?" After saying this, his face became a little ferocious. Is it wrong to think for my tribe? If that's the case, what's the point of being born? If I can't even protect my own family, how can I be a man? How can I be a man? Hiss. Hearing this, many of the soldiers sucked in a breath of cold air. These words could be said to be heart-wrenching. In ancient times, many soldiers rushed to the battlefield and shouted the slogan to be loyal to the king, to the country. But was this really the case? How many of the so-called loyal people had seen the emperor? How many people had feelings for the so-called country? In the end, soldiers fighting was just a way to make a living. Simply speaking, it was to survive. If there were other purposes, it would be to get promoted and get rich. Therefore, the slogan to be loyal to the king was just a slogan. No one would really think that way. On the contrary, more people did it for the sake of being able to survive in troubled times. There were also some people who were lucky and were promoted from soldiers to officers with some authority. Then, their goal would be higher. This was how they filled their own pockets and how they could take advantage of the situation to create more wealth for themselves. In this way, there was the so-called eating empty pay and stealing military supplies. The direct result of this was that the upper echelons of the military wanted to win the war. This was more beneficial to their future promotion and wealth, and even their wives and children. The middle-level officers, especially those young generals who didn't have much room for promotion, thought the opposite. They wanted to win the war. In this way, the matter of them moving public funds would be impossible to investigate along with the defeat and the death of some people. They could even take advantage of this opportunity to eat more empty pay and get some empty pay. As for the soldiers at the bottom, they were only following orders. If the situation was to their advantage, they would rush up and fight to see if there was a chance to obtain any benefits. On the other hand, once the situation was unfavorable, they would just turn around and run. Staying alive was the most important thing. As for whether or not they won the war, what did it have to do with them? Or rather, there wouldn't be any change in the future. If that was the case, why should they risk their lives? These were some of the true portrayals of the military. Then, could such an army win the war? Without faith, without spiritual support, and without even daring to have hope, could an army expand and unleash their potential? The answer was obviously yes. It was also because of this that Tang Sheng didn't feel any shame for his rebellion. On the contrary, he could still speak frankly in front of everyone without a change in expression. This wasn't because he was thick-skinned, but because his thoughts and perspective were different. After Tang Sheng shouted out what was wrong, his gaze swept across the Far Eastern army. Then, he began to call out names. Commander Chi Wu, as far as I know, your tribe is also outside of All City. Once winter comes, they have to face the pressure of the wind and snow. May I ask, what can you do for them? If you can't, what's the point of being a commander? Vice Commander Zhang Hai, your situation is the same. Let me ask you, how do you feel at ease? Battalion Commander Li Dei, I heard that 3 of your tribesmen have already frozen to death in the heavy snow this winter. Don't tell me you want to continue with the 4th and 5th? Tang Sheng was calling out names. It wasn't targeted at a specific division. It was completely random. He would call out the name of whoever he saw. There were people in a few divisions who were called out. Chapter 1389. All the officers who were called out lowered their heads, proving that Tang Sheng was right, proving that they were having a complicated struggle in their hearts. These people were the unstable elements in the Far Eastern Army. They were the internal problems that Commander Chen Bo was worried about. After Archeng was taken down, he did not immediately launch a counterattack. Instead, he split up the army and hid them. He was afraid that the problem would be too big. Now, after hearing Tang Sheng's words, many people had been bewitched to the point that they were ready to make a move. This was especially so for some of the officers who were called out. When they noticed the changes in the gazes of the people around them, they knew that there was no point in hiding anymore. Thus, they decided to stand out and walk towards the Mongolian camp where Tang Sheng was. Some of them did not only bring a single officer, they also brought their brothers and soldiers with them as they walked towards the Mongol cavalry camp. Stop them! Xia Qian saw that the situation was about to turn bad and quickly shouted. At this moment, Kong He and the other 3 division commanders also looked over. They looked at Dai Qua, who was still riding on his horse calmly. Under everyone's gaze, Dai Qua slowly raised his right hand and said calmly, "Don't stop them. Their hearts are no longer with the 5-star army. They can still be of use to us. We have to respect their choice. If there are others who have the same thoughts, you can also walk over." Not only did he not stop them, he even supported them. This made everyone confused. Tang Sheng also saw Dai Qua's actions and laughed. He then said, "I didn't expect General Dai Qua to be such a reasonable person. However, I don't know if you have the same thoughts. You can come over as well. Don't worry, with this general here, I will ensure your wealth and glory." Tang Sheng was actually persuading Dai Qua to surrender. When Xia Qian heard this, he couldn't help but reach for the scimitar at his waist. He was even prepared to kill Dai Qua if Dai Qua really dared to do that. He would never allow anything to happen to the Far East army that the commander had single-handedly created. Dai Qua also did not expect such a move. He noticed that there were roughly 3,000 people from the Far Eastern army who had walked out and joined the Mongol army. Although there were still some people who looked hesitant, they didn't do anything out of line. These people could still be won over, so he thought it was time to stop. While Tang Sheng was comforting him, he said, "Glory and wealth? Ha, Tang Sheng, are you joking with me?" Since Dai Qua had responded, Tang Sheng was naturally delighted. He was afraid that the other party wouldn't say or do anything. If that happened, he wouldn't know where to start. But once the other party opened his mouth, his opportunity appeared. If there was a problem, there was nothing to be afraid of. All they had to do was solve it. Tang Sheng smiled and wanted to ask why there was no glory and wealth. But before he could speak, Dai Qua continued, "The Mongolians are so poor that they don't even have a uniform. The soldiers don't even have spare cavalry swords. They don't even bear to put salt in their food. Tell me, where did the glory and wealth come from?" The Mongolians were really poor. When they didn't know how to produce and couldn't rob others, their lives were actually very poor. The Mongolians that everyone saw killing cows and sheep were the modern Mongolians, not the old Mongolians. In the past, the Mongolians weren't good at producing. They only knew how to herd animals. If they wanted to eat a good meal, they had to wait until something happened to their animals or they died. Those were the animals that they relied on to survive. The males had to be kept and the females had to be prepared to give birth. How could they just casually eat them? It was because they were poor that they had to go around robbing. Dai Qua's question made Tang Sheng's expression change. He didn't know how to answer. And this was just the beginning. Through the radio, Dai Qua knew and prepared much more than Tang Sheng. He looked at Tang Sheng with a contemptuous gaze and said, "The glory and wealth you told everyone about should be just a saying. You're trying to deceive everyone, right? But how wise am I? How could I be so easily fooled like these idiots?" As he spoke, Dai Qua pointed at the men who had just joined the Mongolian army from the Far Eastern army. Being reprimanded, the traitors, who had a guilty conscience, naturally lowered their heads. There were also some people who looked at Tang Sheng. Evidently, they wanted to hear his explanation. They wanted to know if the glory and wealth he had mentioned was real or fake. Seeing these people staring at him, Tang Xing felt his hair stand on end. He quickly waved his hands and explained, "Everyone, don't listen to his nonsense. He's just messing with our morale." "Messing with your morale? Ha ha ha, you think too highly of yourself. Do you think you're worthy of talking about morale? You're just a bunch of mobs. You'll go wherever there are benefits. You don't have any principles at all. You don't know what loyalty is. You don't deserve to be human." Dai Qua's voice was very loud as he shouted at Tang Xing and the soldiers who had just surrendered. This shout made Tang Xing and the others feel a sense of panic. In order to stabilize the morale of the army, he had to shout as loudly as well. "He's talking nonsense. The Mongolian army has now taken over Al City. Everyone has seen the wealth and prosperity there with their own eyes." Yes, yes. Because of Tang Xing's words, the traders who had been slightly shaken started to nod their heads again. They then glared at Dai Qua fiercely, as if saying, "You're talking nonsense, you're messing up our morale. Al City, prosperous." Ha ha ha. As if he had heard the funniest joke in the world, Dai Qua looked up to the sky and laughed. Although he was also a division commander in the Far Eastern Army, he had been traveling with Yang Chendong for a while and had conquered many territories. He had seen a lot, and the prosperity of Al City was not worth mentioning in his eyes. Although he had not been to Qiqian City, just the prosperity of the beginning city was many times better than Al City. After laughing for a while, Dai Qua seemed to have finished expressing the laughter in his heart. Then, he looked at Tang Xing and the others with disdain and said, "In your eyes, Al City might be very busy, but right now, it is not in my eyes. Taking a step back, what does the prosperity of Al City have to do with you? Do you really think that the Mongolians will treat you as their own and give you benefits?" Tang Xing's face was a little ugly. Of course, he knew that the Mongolians were always on guard against him. In the past 3 months, he had felt it deeply in Al City. However, at this moment, when the armies were about to clash, he definitely could not admit it. Not only that, he had to praise the Mongolian army. Only then would he be able to raise their morale and obtain victory. After hesitating for a few breaths, Tang Xing opened his mouth and said, "Why can't you give it to us? I might as well tell you that Houlihan has already agreed. In the future, Al City will belong to us. Other than our families, our people can also move in." What? Did the Mongolian Great Khan really say that? If that's the case, it's a great thing. In an instant, the Far Eastern Army soldiers started to mutter and discuss. Previously, because the city was too small and could not accommodate so many people, Chen Bo made the rule that other than soldiers, ordinary people could not enter the city. It was also because of this that it attracted all sorts of complaints and caused Tang Xing to rebel. Tang Xing also grasped this point, which was why his actions had gained the support of more soldiers. It was only because of his call that more than 3,000 soldiers joined his side. This was Tang Xing's trump card. The reason why he was so confident that he could face the Far Eastern Army with just 10,000 cavalry was also because of this reason. Right now, everyone was discussing animatedly and the public opinion was obviously leaning towards his side. In order to stabilize the situation and also to speed up Dai Qua's defeat, he intentionally looked at the Mongolian General Ulu and said, "If everyone doesn't believe me, you can go and ask General Ulu." Ulu had never heard that the Mongolian army wanted to take control of Al City with Tang Xing. However, he was not stupid enough to deny all of this. He thought that as long as he won the battle, he could do whatever he wanted. He immediately laughed and said, "That's right, General Tang Xing is right. The Great Khan did say that he was willing to take control of Al City with the brothers of the Far Eastern Army and share the world." "You're lying." Just as Wu Lu finished speaking and Tang Xing's expression relaxed, Dai Qua shouted loudly. "Stop it!" Dai Qua shouted. He did not expect Tang Xing to be so shameless. Furthermore, this Mongolian general was actually lying through his teeth. He had already received the telegram. The Mongolian army had already left Archang after looting the place. How could he say such a thing? Knowing that the other party was lying, Dai Qua could not let him continue. After he interrupted the other party's words, he said loudly, "Everyone, don't listen to their nonsense. Truth be told, the Mongol army has already left Allaire city after a round of inhumane pillaging." Nonsense. Dai Qua's words immediately caused Ulu and Tang Sheng to refute in unison. One of them was one of Hulahan's favorite generals, while the other was entrusted with an important task to deal with the Far Eastern army. With such a status, how could he believe that Hu Lihan had already betrayed him? The two naturally did not believe it, but Dai Qua, who had received the news, laughed and said, "I knew you wouldn't believe it, but don't worry, there will be evidence in front of you soon. Come on, release the signal." Chapter 1390. The so-called signal was a dazzling firework. Although the effect was a little worse during the day, the loud noise and the scene of the explosion in the sky could still be clearly seen. After the firework was released, rumbling sounds could be heard from the ground. At the same time, a Mongol cavalry scout quickly came to General Ulu's side. "General, we've discovered the enemy. About 4,000 enemy cavalry suddenly appeared behind us. They're flying the 5-star Army's flag. An excellent scout would be able to quickly determine the number of enemies. Just from this point alone, this scout was qualified. However, he only came to report after the rumbling sounds of the warhorses. It was too late, so he did not pass." "Bastard, why did you only report back now?" Wu Lu cursed angrily and lashed out with his horsewhip at the scout. The scout had a wronged expression on his face. He wanted to say that the enemy cavalry was completely covered in green leaves and could not be seen unless they were right in front of them. But at this moment, he no longer had the chance to speak, because behind them, the bright 5-starred flag that could not be ignored was already in sight. They had already arrived at the battlefield. When the scout came to report, the Mongol cavalry had already put up a basic resistance. However, when faced with the elite 1st Cavalry Army, how could these Mongol cavalry be a match for them? In just one charge, hundreds of corpses were thrown to the side. Just as they heard the sound of hooves, the 5-star army had already arrived in front of them. When they got closer, they could see that some of the warhorses still had green leaves on them. Camouflage and infiltration was one of the training courses of the 5-star army. Furthermore, they already knew the location of the battle, so it was not difficult to enter the battlefield without being discovered. "Everyone listen to my orders, stop." Beta Persei's loud voice sounded out, and the Mongol cavalry immediately stopped. Their formation was neat and orderly, and it was obvious that they were well-trained elites. They did not make a sound, and other than the snorting of the horses, there was no other sound. They all waited for Beta Persei's next order. There was a kind of aura that made people admire him and fear him, not daring to look at him directly. For example, right now, there was a person who had such an aura. His chest was straighter than ever, and his footsteps were steady and sonorous. His gaze was clear and transparent, as if he could look straight into the depths of one's heart. In fact, whether it was a war or a fight between two people, the key to victory was one's mentality. When facing an enemy, he would have the absolute aura of a cat against a mouse. When he was the number one in the world, he would definitely crush his opponent. Then, he would win. Although there were only 4,000 cavalry under Yang Er's command, they gave off a feeling that they were an invincible army with thousands of men and horses. They were both cavalry, but in comparison, the Mongol cavalry was much weaker. This could be seen from the shock on the Mongol soldiers' faces. Without comparison, there would be no harm. The 5-star army's military formation was neat, and they were all dressed in the same uniform. Their sabers were of the same length and size, and under the sunlight, they emitted waves of cold light. Even when he was riding on a horse, he was still riding horizontally and vertically, giving people a very shocking visual impression. The formation wasn't trained for nothing, and the effect was very obvious. Not only did it make the soldiers more self-disciplined, but it also made them better at following orders. Just their mental appearance alone gave people a lot of pressure. This. When more Mongol cavalrymen looked at the 5-star army and didn't know how to describe their feelings, Ulu opened his mouth. Everyone, don't be afraid. They only have 4,000 people. As long as we charge forward, victory will belong to us. Let's see who dares. Beta Persei faced Ulu's shout, and after a loud shout, the 4,000 5-star army raised their sabers high, and a soul-shaking aura surged out. There were less than 2,000 Mongol cavalrymen left, and they were completely shocked by the aura of the 5-star army. At this moment, they found that they didn't have the courage to take a step forward. As the commander of the army, Ulu naturally saw everything. Because of this, he cleverly didn't take a step forward. Instead, he looked at Tang Sheng and said, "General Tang, let's go together. As long as we can destroy these Han reinforcements, the main force of the Mongol cavalrymen will arrive soon. At that time, no one will be our opponent." Ulu wanted Tang Sheng and the others to charge first, and then he could sit back and reap the benefits. In his eyes, even 10 Far Eastern Army soldiers weren't as important as a Mongol soldier. Tang Sheng wasn't stupid. How could he not see Ulu's intention? However, he didn't dare to act rashly. Putting aside the fact that he had already witnessed the might of the 5-star army when he sent reinforcements to the first city, there were still more than 20,000 soldiers of the Far East army staring at him. Under the shout, Tang Sheng didn't move. Beta Persei saw everything inside. With his personality, since he had brought the army here, of course, he would kill to his heart's content. What Mongol army? What Far East army? He had never placed them in his eyes. They were just a bunch of mobs. As long as he wanted, the 4,000 warriors of the world's first cavalry army could kill all of them. However, he couldn't do this. Before he came, the young master had instructed that the construction of the Far East region needed people the most. A large number of young people. The people in front of him were all strong laborers. They were indispensable talents to build the city and consolidate the territory. If he killed them, who would build the city and who would repair the roads? In order to complete the task given by Yang Chendong, it was impossible to kill a lot of people. However, he could still kill a chicken to show respect. He had to do it. Some people were like this. If you didn't kill them, they wouldn't know fear. However, before he took action, Beta Persei still needed to do something. This was very important to destroy the enemy's morale, establish the final victory, and even unify their hearts. Come, bring them here. Beta Persei didn't give the order to attack immediately. Instead, he shouted to bring people. Soon, the 5-star army soldiers escorted 2 men to the battlefield. They arrived in front of the open space between the 2 camps. Of the 2 people, one was a skinny man wearing a Mongol army uniform, and the other was a middle-aged man who looked to be in his 40s. Both of their faces were pale, and they were trembling with fear. As soon as the 2 of them were brought out, there were 2 loud shouts from the battlefield. Tuoba Shi? Li Hui. The one called Tuoba Shi was the Mongol soldier. He had another identity, which was General Ulu's personal guard. Previously, he didn't follow the army out of the city because he wasn't feeling well. Instead, he stayed in All City. The one called Li Hui was Tang Sheng's clansman. When the Tang residence's treasures were stolen and his clansmen were killed, Li Hui wasn't in the residence, so he escaped death. These 2 people, because of their special identities, were targeted by Yang Xie's intelligence personnel in All City. They were captured alive and sent out of the city. Last night, Yang Heir had already sent someone to pick up the 2 of them. What he wanted was to use their mouths to tell the truth. He wanted Ulu and Tang Sheng to see what kind of person the great Khan Hulahan, whom they served, was. Wu Lu and Tang Sheng were naturally the ones who shouted. It was just their instinct to shout out loud. In contrast, after the two people who were called saw their respective masters, their tears uncontrollably flowed out. When a person brushed past death and saw their loved ones, they would definitely reveal their true feelings. General, young clan leader, it's all gone, it's all gone. Tuoba Shi and Li Hui didn't wait for anyone to ask. With tears and snot, they recounted everything that had happened in Al City and what had happened to their family. After that, whether it was Ulu or Tangsheng, when they heard that Hulahan had led his troops out of Al City and fled to the Siberian region, it was as if they were struck by lightning. They stood in place, not moving at all. Although they did not know why the Great Khan had retreated, one thing was for sure. They were all abandoned people, abandoned as pawns, thrown here. Ulu couldn't understand why his Great Khan would abandon him. Tang Sheng's face was full of shame. He thought of how Belinsky persuaded him to send out troops. Belinsky wanted to abandon him, but at the same time, he also wanted to steal his treasures. When he thought of how he had mistakenly trusted Belinsky, and how he and Li Hui were the only two people left in the entire tribe, he couldn't help but scream, "Belinsky, you liar, you despicable, you bastard." It was because Tang Sheng believed in Belinsky that he became a traitor to the Far Eastern Army and came to this point. But what he got was betrayal and the destruction of his tribe. If he could do it all over again, Tang Sheng would not have made such a choice. Whether it was Ulu or Tang Sheng, they both had fierce looks in their eyes as they cursed everything that had happened to them. This scene was seen by the other officers and soldiers, and all of them fell into deep thought. This was especially so for the Far Eastern Army that had defected with Tang Sheng. They thought that after joining their new master, they would be able to enjoy glory and wealth. At the very least, they would be able to ensure the safety of their tribesmen. But now, not only would they not be able to save their tribesmen, they would also not have a good ending. After all, traitors never had a good ending. The atmosphere of the battlefield changed drastically because of the appearance of Tuoba Shi and Li Hui. The most obvious change was that the Far East Army that had surrendered had become restless and restless. Charge! With such a good opportunity, how could Beta Persei let it go? With an order, the 4,000 five-star army cavalry behind him moved, raising their sabers and urging their horses forward. The first to bear the brunt of this attack were the 2,000 Mongol cavalry. Their morale was already low, and Tuoba Shi's appearance had destroyed their hope. Just as their morale was at its lowest, the five-star army charged over. How could they stop them? Chapter 1391. When the arrow formation stabbed into the Mongol cavalry camp, the resistance they faced could be said to be minuscule. This allowed the attack of the 5-star Legion Corps to go really smoothly. With just one charge, they charged into the enemy formation, and no one could stop them. Block them, block them. Ulu, who finally came back to his senses, shouted at the army as he looked at Tang Sheng and said, "General Tang, although we have been abandoned, we have to kill our way out for ourselves. Otherwise, what awaits us will be worse than death." How could Tang Sheng not know? He was a traitor, and from a certain point of view, he was far more hateful than the enemy. Once he was caught by the 5-star army, he would probably suffer a fate worse than death. Tang Sheng did not want to die and could not die. He still wanted to take revenge on Belinsky. He immediately waved his sword and shouted to his troops, "Everyone, follow me and kill our way out. Let's find Hulahan and take revenge." With a loud shout, Tang Sheng was the first to gallop out of the camp. The group of personal guards beside him also followed suit. However, that was it. Including the soldiers, there were only 20 or so cavalry. As for the others, including Qi Wu, Zhang Shi, and Li Dai, they all stood in place and did not move at all. The soldiers behind them also followed beside their general. They also had no intention of charging out of the battle. When the 5-star army's reinforcements arrived and Hulahan fled without saying anything, it was clear that the situation was over. Anyone with a brain would not make the decision to become enemies with the 5-star army. Other than the 20 or so soldiers, there was actually no one following them. Tang Sheng's face revealed a trace of loneliness. However, he did not blame these people. They had already followed him down the wrong path. He could not drag them to their deaths. Come, follow me and kill our way out. Kill. Tang Sheng was determined to fight to the death. He was the first to charge towards the 5-star army. He knew very well what he had done. Even if he surrendered now, he would not benefit at all. Since that was the case, he might as well take the risk. If he could really break out, he would definitely find a way to find Belinsky and take revenge for the extermination of his clan. Surround them all, don't let a single one escape. Beta Persei was riding on a big, strong horse, his face full of excitement. After following Yang Qindong for so many years, there were fewer and fewer opportunities for him to take action, let alone the opportunity to lead an army alone. It wasn't easy for him to let go of everything and go on a killing spree. He would cherish it very much. Come, don't waste any more time. Both of you, come at me together. Beta Persei laughed heartily as he casually pointed his broadsword at Ulu and Tang Sheng. It was as if he was looking down on the world. Attack together. After Ulu and Tang Sheng exchanged a look, they nodded in unison. Then, they whipped their horses and charged towards Beta Persei. This was their only chance. With 2 against 1, their chances of winning were still very high. As long as they could capture this general, they would be able to force their way out of the encirclement. Wu Luoning had become a general among the many Mongolian cavalry. His own ability was naturally unquestionable. There was no culture at all, and one could not rely on qualifications and other resources. Those who could become generals were undoubtedly extremely capable. Tang Sheng was the same. To be able to stand out among so many people and be appointed as a teacher, his own combat strength must be very strong. Both of them were like this. Together, they could be considered a strong combination. If they only fought one person, their chances of winning were quite high. At least in the Far Eastern Army, Chen Bo, including the army commander, would not be a match for him. But who was Beta Persei? He was one of the 5 members of the Yang Qindong family. He had been by Yang Qindong's side all year round. Apart from being different from the rest, his own combat strength was also constantly improving. If his strength was too weak, he would not have the face to stay by Yang Qindong's side. Not to mention other things, if there was really danger, who would protect who? It was not an exaggeration to say that in the entire Yangxia, the entire 5-star army, Beta Persei was not ranked number 1 in terms of leading troops to war. He also did not have much experience, but if it was a one-on-one battle, then there were really not many people who could be his opponent. With Yang Qindong's personal guidance and the Black Knights and Dragon Guards feeding him moves every day, he was not afraid at all even if it was just 1 versus 2. He pulled out the divine sword from his waist. When he was fighting 2 people by himself, Beta Persei not only did not take a defensive position, but also took the initiative to launch an attack. He would not forget what Yang Qindong had said, that offense was the best defense. Relying on the strength of the divine sword in his hand, Beta Persei was full of confidence as he pulled his horse forward. The 3 generals immediately fought together. Under the gaze of many Far Eastern army soldiers, the wind from their swords collided and the blades struck each other. The 3 of them were almost all fighting openly, without the slightest bit of hypocrisy. It was completely a competition of strength and technique. This kind of battle also took into account one's own physique. If one's strength was not enough, one might show signs of defeat after just 1 blow. If one showed a flaw, it would often cost one's life. In a battle of life and death, a little negligence and a trace of insufficient strength could lead to the loss of one's life. As generals, the three of them naturally understood this principle. Therefore, when they attacked, they used all their strength. It was a fight to the death. Ding ding dang. The divine sword in Beta Persei's hand collided twice in a very short period of time, colliding with the divine sword in the hands of Ulu and Tang Xing respectively. As the saying goes, once an expert makes a move, one will know whether or not he is an expert. In this first exchange, the three of them had a preliminary impression of each other at the same time, especially Ulu and Tang Xing, who felt the numbness in their arms after the first blow. Their faces had become a little nervous. They could feel that if they were to rely on strength alone, they would not be Beta Persei's opponent. Beta Persei belonged to the group of people with extraordinary strength. In addition, he was by Yang Qindong's side every day, eating and drinking well, and his strength was constantly increasing. In terms of strength alone, even the talented black cavalry was no match for him. Only the abnormal Yang Qindong could suppress him. It was this confidence that made Beta Persei so confident when he was fighting against two people by himself. And after using his sword to fight against two people in a row, this confidence swelled even more. Great! Beta Persei also felt a slight tremor in his arm. He laughed and turned around to attack. He had no intention of resting. It was a competition of strength, and he would not stop until he was dead. This person is so strong. Take my spear. After Tang Xing felt the tremendous pressure from the sword, he knew that if this continued, perhaps before he could do anything to his opponent, his arm would become red and swollen, and he would not be able to exert any strength. He simply put away his sword and changed to a spear. He swapped the red Sakura spear hanging next to his horse. The reason why the cavalry mainly used the divine sword was because it was light and flexible. For example, the cavalry required fast speed, fast attack, and fast deployment. All of these had strict requirements for weapons. It was not that they could not use a spear. In history, there were cavalry who used heavy and powerful hammers as weapons. It was just that using such a weapon would inevitably affect their speed and flexibility in combat. As a result, most people used the divine sword. However, those who could use a spear were all people who believed themselves to be strong enough to use it. Otherwise, wouldn't they be giving up on flexibility and speed? Wouldn't they be courting death? Tang Xing changed to a spear, which was enough to prove his confidence in himself and his satisfaction with his physical fitness. He wanted to use his strength to suppress Beta Persei, and then find a favorable opportunity for Ulu to attack. With the spear in his hand, Tang Xing felt as if he was the king of the world. With a loud shout, Tang Xing's qi sank into his dantian. Borrowing the power of the spear, he swung the spear at Yang air. The spear swept through the air, causing a weak explosion. Good! Beta Persei, who was rushing over, also laughed. He did not have the slightest idea of retreating because his opponent had changed his weapon. On the contrary, his fighting spirit was even more abundant. He was afraid that his opponent would not use his full strength. Just like when he was sparring with the black cavalry, everyone was afraid of accidentally injuring each other, so naturally, they would have a backup plan. It was not like this kind of life and death battle, where it was either you die or I die. There was no need to worry so much. Only then could a fight be called carefree. With a smile still on his face, Beta Persei had already urged his horse to come in front of Tang Xing. His sword and spear collided several times in a very short period of time. There was a continuous sound of clashing, and because they were all so fast, it made the onlookers feel dazzled. With the length of the spear, Tang Xing was able to restrain Beta Persei's attack for a while, keeping him at a distance of 10 feet. He was temporarily out of danger. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ulu attacked. He took advantage of the spear entangling the divine sword to launch a sneak attack and harass Beta Persei from the side. He did not expect to be able to hurt Beta Persei. As long as he could distract him, it was equivalent to creating an opportunity for Tang Xing. Although it was the first time the two of them worked together, there were few flaws between them. Perhaps they also knew that this was a life-and-death battle, and it would be very dangerous if they did not use their full strength. So when they attacked, they used all their strength and displayed their strongest attacks and methods. Entangled by the spear and harassed by the dagger, Beta Persei fell into a passive situation. Several times, he revealed some small flaws. Perhaps it was because he was strong enough that the dagger shook off his opponent's weapon several times, but he was afraid that he would have been injured by now. If it were someone else in this position, they would probably have to call for help. After all, the 5-star army had the advantage in terms of strength. And because of the bravery and strength of the warriors, nearly 2,000 Mongolian cavalry had been disrupted and were in the middle of being surrounded. It seemed that victory was already in sight. As such, there were hundreds of 5-star army cavalry around the three-man group battle. They were here to prevent Ulu and Tang Sheng from escaping, and they were also prepared to support Beta Persei at any time. Chapter 1392. As long as Beta Persei shouted and retreated, the 5-star army cavalry watching from the sidelines would swarm forward. At that time, it would not be 2 against 1, but dozens of people against 1. But Beta Persei did not complain, nor did he have the slightest intention of backing down. His identity did not allow him to back down, and the celestial sword in his hand was where his confidence lay. He had already clashed with his opponent's weapon for more than a dozen rounds. The weapons in the hands of these two generals were not ordinary iron, at least much tougher than ordinary iron. But there was a limit to how strong they were. In the face of the celestial sword made with the highest forging technology in the world, it was only a matter of time before they broke. And once the opponent's weapon broke from the middle, it would be time for Beta Persei to launch a counterattack. Now he only needed to maintain enough physical strength and rely on his arm strength to not let the opponent hurt him. The three weapons were still clashing, and stars would appear from time to time, indicating that the three of them seemed to have used all their strength in each attack, and each attack was extremely dangerous. In this way, the three of them continued to attack for another 5 rounds. Beta Persei's eyes shone brightly when he saw that there was a large gap on the opponent's weapon. He knew that the celestial sword had finally taken advantage of his advantage. The opponent's weapon would break at any time, and his opportunity to counterattack had appeared. The time had come. Beta Persei suddenly shouted, and the strength in his arm increased by a bit, so much so that it reached 90% of his overall strength. He slashed the celestial sword at the body of the spear. Under the great force, Tang Sheng felt his arm tighten. Because of the great force, he almost fell off his horse. Fortunately, he managed to control himself at the last moment. When he looked up, he saw that Beta Persei had given up on him and was slashing his sword at Ulu. Good chance. Tang Sheng's eyes lit up, then he gripped the spear tightly and thrust it forward. He only needed 2 breaths to stab the spearhead into Beta Persei's armor, severely injuring his opponent and capturing the most important hostage. Beta Persei seemed to treat Tang Sheng as an invisible person. At this time, he was slashing his saber at Ulu's body, looking like he was going to fight to the end. Ulu could tell that Beta Persei was going all out. Logically speaking, he should have urged his horse to retreat and avoid the brunt of Beta Persei's attack. For someone like him who grew up on horseback, he did not need to exert any force on the reins when advancing or retreating with his horse. He only needed to gently press his legs together to communicate with his horse and retreat in the face of battle. However, Ulu did not retreat. He needed to create favorable conditions and enough time for Tang Sheng to attack. This made it necessary for him to block a few slashes from the saber. Wu Lu was confident that he would be able to block 3 or 4 attacks within 2 breaths of time, rather than holding the saber with one hand. There was no problem with his strength, Wu Lu was confident about this. However, the problem was that his weapon could not do it. When faced with the divine cavalry saber that could cut through iron like mud, Wu Lu's cavalry saber had already been chipped. It was only because he had been fighting hard that he did not notice it. Ulu did not expect that his weapon, which had always been very tough, would be broken in half. Therefore, he still followed his previous fighting style, placing the saber on his body and defending himself. 1 hit, 2 hits. When the third hit came, Beta Persei's saber slashed at the gap in Ulu's saber. Then, with a crisp breaking sound, the saber broke into 2 pieces. The sudden change caught Ulu off guard. Before he could react, the divine saber had already landed on Ulu's body. The sharp edge of the saber directly broke his bones. With just one blow, Ulu was cut into 2 halves. Blood splattered out as Uru's eyes widened in disbelief as he fell from his horse. Even as he died, he still could not understand how his weapon could suddenly break in half. Could it be that this Han general knew some kind of magic? Ulu was dead. He was cut in half and died in an extremely miserable manner. Blood also splashed on Beta Persei, but for Beta Persei, who had been on countless battlefields and killed countless enemies, he did not care at all. As if he had done an extremely simple thing, he turned around and prepared to deal with another enemy, Tang Sheng. It was also at this moment that he felt something poke his body. It did not hurt, so he immediately turned around to look. Beta Persei turned around and looked at the spot where he was stabbed. He saw a broken spearhead, Tang Sheng who was holding the spear, and the other party's frightened eyes. Just now, Beta Persei had used up 2 breaths of time to kill Ulu, which created enough opportunity for Tang Sheng. Next, he unceremoniously raised his spear and stabbed, with a victorious smile on his face. It was not until the spear stabbed out that his expression suddenly changed. He did not feel the tip of the spear entering his body, but only the feeling of the blade piercing into a hard boulder, unable to move forward. At the same time, Tang Sheng's gaze quickly turned to the tip of the spear. At some point, the tip of the spear had been broken, leaving only a wooden handle. At this time, the wooden handle was stabbed towards Beta Persei, and it hit the other party's exquisite armor. Beta Persei, who had been by Yang Chendong's side all year round, could be said to be a treasure from head to toe. Just like the armor he was wearing, it was thin and extremely hard. Yang Xie's munitions factory spent a lot of effort to make it. Such armor was also very rare in the entire 5-star army. With Beta Persei's status, it was naturally not a problem for him to get one. The spear was stabbed into the armor, unable to move forward. Tang Sheng was still in the same position, his face full of surprise and confusion. Seeing that Tang Sheng's spear had stabbed into his armor, Beta Persei's face was full of anger. Originally, Tang Sheng had betrayed the 5-star army, Yang Xie, and the young master, causing him to want to kill him. Now that Tang Sheng even wanted to kill him, this person could not be left alive. Beta Persei, who had already killed Ulu, gently turned around and easily moved the spear to the side. Then, the celestial saber slashed through the air and slashed towards Tang Sheng's neck. War has always been cruel, either you die or I die. Beta Persei was furious. The saber was as fast as lightning. When Tang Sheng came back to his senses, he had only just raised the spear when the wooden spear was cut in half. The saber did not continue to fall and fell on Tang Sheng's neck, then quickly slashed. Blood gushed out like a fountain, and Tang Sheng's eyes gradually became blurred. At this time, he seemed to have seen the scene of him growing up with the help of the tribe when he was young. He also seemed to have seen the scene of him joining the Far Eastern Army and eating his first full meal. Then, he rose step by step and finally became a division commander. Then, his ambition began to grow, and his heart became unsatisfied until he did the wrong thing of betraying the Far Eastern Army. Tang Sheng was dead. Even when he died, his eyes were wide open, and he looked like he could not die in peace. No one knew what he was thinking before he died, and no one knew if he would regret his wrong actions and thoughts. With Tang Sheng's death, the soldiers he brought with him immediately became obedient. Especially the more than 3,000 soldiers who had just chosen to surrender to him, their faces were full of regret. If they had known that this would be the result, why did they stand out? Weren't they courting death? Nearly 2,000 Mongolian soldiers, half were killed and the other half were captured. More than 10,000 rebels from the Far Eastern Army were surrounded by Division Commander Dai Qua and 20,000 soldiers, and all of them chose to put down their weapons and surrender. Even Ulu and Tang Sheng were not a match for them. Unless they did not want to live, who would dare to raise their swords against them? The rebellion was thus quelled, but the matter was not over. How to stabilize the people's hearts and win them over was an important task for Yang Chendong after arriving in the Far Eastern province. After 3 months of chaos in Archeng, Yang Chendong arrived. Along with him were thousands of 5-star army's elite cavalry, thousands of Mongolian captives, and thousands of ordinary Russian tribesmen. When Yang Chendong led the army into Al City, whose city walls weren't very tall, all he saw was a mess on the streets and chaos on the ground. On the streets, he could see the corpses of ordinary people lying on the ground. There were old people, women, and children. Many of them had been conquered by the 5-star army. They were the people who had come to support the Far Eastern province, but they did not expect to die in such a chaotic situation. Along the way, Yang Chendong's expression became uglier and uglier. These were his people, and they had actually died in the city. He had to take revenge for Hulahan. Fortunately, after inspecting the corpses, he discovered that there were very few Han people. Later on, Yang Chendong understood the situation in the city. When the Mongolian soldiers killed and looted, the few Han people in the city chose to hide. They threw away all their money in order to save their lives. These Han people persevered. As long as they were still alive, everything would still be there. Bugnam of Gojoseon would definitely bring them a better life. In order to survive, after the Mongol soldiers left, some of the criminals in the city started to pillage and kill. These Han Chinese once again chose to band together. They picked up their weapons and became a force to be reckoned with. As long as they did not take the initiative to find trouble with others, no one would find trouble with them. This was how they managed to survive until Yang Chendong's arrival. As Yang Chendong entered the city, the law and order in the city quickly stabilized. On the streets, the soldiers of the world's #1 cavalry army were patrolling the streets. They were dressed in neat military uniforms, riding on tall horses, and wielding divine weapons in their hands. Whenever they discovered someone doing something illegal on the streets, they would immediately lash out with their horsewhips and capture them. There was no room for discussion. Chapter 1393. The impartiality of the 5-star army's soldiers shocked some of the rebels and made them more obedient. However, there were still some daring people who took advantage of the fact that the 5-star army's numbers were not high. They gathered their forces and attacked the patrolling soldiers of the 5-star army. They attacked with dozens of people and even hundreds of people. These people were mostly white-skinned Russians. They took a liking to the soldiers' uniforms and sharp sabers, as well as the sturdy war horses they were riding. Facing the provocation and the rebels who were shouting and holding weapons such as sabers, sticks, clubs, and even hoes, the 5-star army did not hold back and killed them all. Since they dared to provoke the army, these people had already lost their humanity and deserved to die. Dozens of people or even hundreds of people could not even hold up against the charge of the world's #1 cavalry army and suffered heavy casualties. The formation was in chaos and they scattered in all directions. Those who could not escape became members of the prison. In just a single afternoon, the prison of the Far Eastern Army was filled with people. Some of the people who were caught later could only be tied up in the square outside the prison. Fortunately, it was already the 5th month and the weather was not too cold. They would not freeze to death. In troubled times, severe punishments were needed. When Yang Chendong heard the report that there were rebels in the city, he did not restrict the actions of the 5-star army soldiers. On the contrary, he supported them. He knew that one could not be merciful on the battlefield. Otherwise, one would be asking for trouble. There were some people that couldn't be reasoned with. Only continuous slaughter would make them realize their mistakes and realize the power of the 5-star army. Thus, they had no choice but to restrain themselves and become honest. While they were clearing out the unstable elements in all city and had no choice but to kill, Jianghu's 4,000 cavalrymen successfully intercepted Hulahan's troops who were escaping to the west. After a round of fighting, Hulahan brought 12,000 Mongol cavalrymen and escaped. On the other hand, Belinsky, who had too many items and could not bear to throw them away, was captured on the spot. He had personally witnessed the strength of the 5-star army. When he saw the strength of the 5-star army, the Mongol soldiers panicked and ran away with twisted faces. He saw that iron sabers and wooden spears were thrown all over the ground. The various items that they had snatched had also become burdens. They had all been abandoned in order to increase their speed. The army was defeated like a landslide. Countless Mongol cavalrymen, who were known as the strongest army, fled like sheep seeing wolves. They all exposed their backs to the 5-star army and were chased by the world's #1 cavalry army. They did not have any intention of resisting. This kind of strength only the Mongol cavalrymen and some Mongol tribes did not belong to the Mongol army. Unexpectedly, there was always someone stronger. The 5-star army was actually so ferocious that the Mongol cavalrymen could not fight back at all. Belinsky was captured, but he was not depressed. On the contrary, he felt that this was an opportunity for him. Since the Mongol cavalrymen could not defeat the 5-star army, why would he not join the strong? With such a powerful cavalry as his backing, he would not have to be afraid of anyone when he went out to do business. With this beautiful thought in mind, Belinsky stopped the resistance of the guards of the caravan. They obediently surrendered their weapons. Belinsky also reported his identity. At the same time, he put forward his request. He wanted to see the highest general of the 5-star army here. He had some information to report. Jianghu saw that Belinsky seemed like someone important. He also thought about how his teacher had just arrived and needed to understand the situation here through various channels. He also needed various people to help him complete his mission. As such, he nodded and agreed. He did not even use a rope to tie Belinsky up. He gave him a very relaxed environment and allowed him to come to Archeng with him. This also strengthened Belinsky's confidence. He believed that with his own abilities, he would be able to achieve great things. As for the fact that he had tricked the Far Eastern army, that was nothing. Wasn't it like this during times of war? Today, we can drink and chat happily, but tomorrow, we might fight. On the other hand, today, we might be enemies, but tomorrow, we might be friends. To sum it up, there was no such thing as an eternal friend, only eternal benefits. Because of the 5-star army's ruthless methods, Archeng went from chaos to peace. Then, when the Far Eastern army that had disappeared for 3 months suddenly appeared in the city, the security in the city became as good as before. As a large number of troops entered the city, some criminals who had not given up on making a fortune in the chaos had no choice but to put away their crooked thoughts. At this moment, it could be said that Archeng had returned to Yang Xie's embrace. Chen Bo's condition gradually stabilized. After the army entered the city, he went straight to the city lord's mansion where Yang Chendong lived. When he saw Yang Chendong, who had taken off his golden cloak and changed into a loose green robe, Chen Bo knelt on the ground with a plop. "Young master, I've made a mistake. I've failed to live up to your expectations. Get up quickly." Under Yang Chendong's gaze, Beta Persei, who came to report with him, quickly helped Chen Bo up. "You haven't recovered yet, you still have to take care of your body. Have a seat." Yang Chendong asked with concern. Although the Archeng incident was lost because of Tang Sheng's rebellion, Chen Bo, who was both the commander and the governor, also had an unshirkable leadership responsibility, as well as the responsibility of not knowing what was right and what was wrong. Of course, One of the fuses that caused the incident was the mistake in his strategy of governing the city. Why did Tang Sheng rebel? Wasn't it because his people were not allowed to enter the city? This policy was set by Chen Bo. On the other hand, even if Tang Sheng didn't rebel this time, as time passed, more and more problems would accumulate, and when the contradiction became bigger and bigger, things would still happen. This was equivalent to a pustule in a person's body. If it was left alone, it would get bigger and bigger. It was better to squeeze it out and make it healthier. Chen Bo, who was sitting in the chair, had a guilty look on his face. In the past few years, the Far Eastern province had received a lot of supplies from Xianxia. In comparison, although there were some achievements, they were not very big. The rebellion this time was equivalent to erasing all of the previous achievements. He was even prepared to be removed from his position, or even convicted. Even though Chen Bo was sitting on a chair, he still lowered his head as if he was in the wrong. Seeing this, Yang Chendong shook his head and said, "Chen Bo, you can be considered an old man who has been following me for a long time. Back then, when you and Wu Xing cooperated, you had such great chemistry. No matter what mission was given to you, you could complete it very well. This young master also has high hopes for you." Wu Xing was sent to the Golden Horde for several years. He has successfully established a cooperative relationship with some important figures in the Russian tribe and built his own Wuxia city. His actions are gratifying. As for you, this young master also has high hopes for you. I gave you the power of the governor and the commander of the Far Eastern province. You have done well, so you don't have to worry that this young master will punish you. You are innocent. In order to dispel Chen Bo's worries and psychological burdens, Yang Chendong directly settled the matter. After saying that he was innocent, even if someone wanted to impeach or blame Chen Bo, it would be useless. Yang Chendong's words were like nails on a board. In Chen Bo's ears, he was very excited. "Thank you, sixth young master, for your affirmation of my work. But Tang Sheng was promoted by me. If something happens to him, I am guilty. I ask that I resign from the position of commander of the Far Eastern Army. Sixth young master, please accept my resignation." Looking at Chen Bo's stubbornness, Yang Chendong was angry and said, "This young master said that you are innocent. If you are guilty, you are just not open-minded enough. It's just a mistake caused by inexperience. It's nothing. No. The rebellion has happened. Someone has to stand up and take responsibility. This subordinate is willing to resign from the position of commander." Chen Bo's second resignation showed his determination. Meritorious service should be rewarded. Mistakes should be punished. The matter of the Far Eastern province was not a small matter. Who knew how many people were watching? If there was no explanation, then the law would be in chaos. Yang Chendong said, "Good. Since it's like this, then you will be relieved of your position as commander of the Far Eastern Army. You should focus on your work as the governor." "Thank you, sixth young master." Chen Bo, who got what he wanted, quickly cupped his fists in gratitude. He did not want to break the rules because of himself. With Yang Chendong's guarantee, no one would find trouble with him. However, there was no guarantee that no one would find trouble with the sixth young master. As far as he knew, there were many people in Crimson City who dared to speak up. Now that he was relieved of his position as commander of the Far Eastern Army, it was the same as giving everyone an explanation. He could also focus on his work as the governor. After staying here for a few years, in the beginning, he had some complaints about being transferred to this godforsaken place. But over the years, he had watched Owl City grow from nothing, and he had developed feelings for it. If he were to transfer him away now, he would be reluctant to do so. More importantly, Yang Chendong came here. With his ability to turn something rotten into something magical, he would have a bright future in the Far Eastern province. He really wanted to follow the sixth young master and do a good job. After being relieved of his position as commander, Chen Bo seemed to be a lot more relaxed in an instant. When he talked about work, his state of mind was a lot more energetic than before. Sixth young master, although Tang Sheng's selfishness caused the mutiny this time, the fact that so many people were willing to follow him to rebel against the Far Eastern army is enough to show that our work is not up to par. The main thing is that Al's city is still too small. Arranging for 500,000 people from all over the place is already a lot of pressure. We really can't arrange for other soldiers' clansmen, even for senior officers like division commanders. Some openings cannot be opened. Chapter 1394. Yang Chendong stood at the side and listened attentively. From time to time, he would nod his head to show that he understood Chen Bo's previous actions. When the other party was almost done, he asked, "Previously, I asked the Far Eastern army to reclaim the wasteland. How is it going?" Speaking of wasteland, Chen Bo immediately perked up. "Sixth young master, according to your instructions, this is what we've been doing during this period of time. With the efforts of 500,000 people, we've reclaimed a total of 20 million mu of land in the past 5 years. The land here is really fertile. Although it's affected by the weather and can't be compared to the south of the Great Ming Dynasty where we can harvest twice or even thrice a year, the yield of crops here is very high and the taste of the crops is also very fragrant. The Far Eastern region had black soil and was very suitable for planting crops. Just like in the future, the 3 eastern provinces became the base for producing crops because of this reason." Hearing that 20 million mu of land had already been reclaimed, Yang Chendong nodded heavily. "Not bad, your work is still very effective." Finally being praised, Chen Bo's expression became a little better. At least he wasn't completely useless. At least he didn't let down the work he had done for the past few years. Right, this time, the Mongolian cavalry suddenly appeared. Has the food been hidden properly? Yang Chendong suddenly thought of a very important question. Next, he wanted to develop the Far Eastern region. This wasn't just because of the bet he made with Yuan. Most importantly, this was an important chess piece for him to enter Europe through the land route. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Therefore, he decided to personally set up the troops here to establish a solid bridge to enter Europe. It's all hidden. Only the commanders and I of the Guard Regiment know the location. Even the other commanders don't know. You know that the soldiers of the Guard Regiment are all Han Chinese. Most of them are youths from Crimson City. Some of them are from the Cold Front. They are all trustworthy. This time, the food is intact. This is enough to prove everything. Good, this matter is well done. If one wanted to develop a place, they had to solve the problem of their stomachs first. If one couldn't even fill their stomachs, how could they talk about development? How about this, take out all the food. Next, whether it is building a city or repairing roads, we will need a lot of able-bodied men, and able-bodied men can eat the most. Hearing that the food was fine, Yang Chendong breathed a sigh of relief. At the same time, he felt more confident. Build a city? Chen Bo was stunned. This was the first time he had heard of such a thing. Yang Chendong smiled and nodded. That's right. If we want to develop the Far Eastern region, just one Al city isn't enough. These 2 days, I also looked at the terrain here. Although the city can still be expanded, it's very limited due to geographical reasons. Since that's the case, it's better to build a few more cities. Only in this way can we arrange more people in the city and solve the worries of the soldiers. Only with a unified mindset can we be motivated and quickly develop the Far Eastern region so that this place can finally reach a state of self-sufficiency. After saying this, Yang Chendong seemed to have thought of something. He sighed and said, Chen Bo, the importance of the Far Eastern region is far more important than you think. In the future, this place will become an important strategic location like Biani City. In the future, if we expand from here to the west, it's definitely impossible to rely on external logistical support. Therefore, building a strong logistical foundation here is the most important thing right now. It can be said that the prosperity of the Far Eastern region is directly related to how big the blades of the Five-Star Army can expand in the future. Hearing that the Far Eastern region was so important, Chen Bo was shocked. He originally thought that Yang Chendong had his eyes on this place because it was sparsely populated and could become a new granary for Yangxia. Therefore, he put all his focus on reclaiming wastelands. But now, after hearing this idea, he realized that his vision was still too limited and his thinking was too petty. Yang Chendong saw Chen Bo's shocked expression and understood. He sighed again and said, calculating the time, Wusheng has been in the Golden Horde for 7 years. The reason why he hasn't been transferred back is to wait for the right time to let him, this chess piece, display his greatest power. And if we only manage the territory in the Far East, then wouldn't his efforts over the past few years have been in vain? I see. Chen Bo finally understood that the construction and development of the Far Eastern region wasn't done on a whim by the 6th young master. It was planned as early as 7 years ago, or even earlier. Yang Chendong felt that there were some things that could be said more seriously today, so he looked at Chen Bo and asked with a serious expression, Chen Bo, the Five-Star Army's territory is already big enough, so why are we still expanding? I'm sure the people below must have a lot of opinions about this. This. Chen Bo didn't want to talk at first, but looking at Yang Chendong's serious expression, he could only bite the bullet and say, the people below have some opinions. But it's not the majority, there are still more people who like to work with the 6th young master. Especially some young people, they still want to build military achievements and are afraid that there won't be any more wars to fight. Wouldn't their years of training be useless in the end? Hee hee. Yang Chendong laughed when he heard Chen Bo's explanation. Young people wanted to build their careers, so they naturally wanted to participate in wars. Only then would they have a chance. But other than them, there were probably more people who didn't want to continue fighting. After all, peace was what everyone wanted. Other than a few extreme people, no one wanted war to happen. If it was possible, why would Yang Chendong want to start a war? He wanted to be with his wife and children, and it would be great to have a family reunion. But reality didn't allow him to do so. This was because he wasn't sure how long Yangxia could maintain her glory. In history, the Great Ming Dynasty was the center of the world. Other than the land of the Great Ming Dynasty, the other places were just barren lands. The things of the Great Ming Dynasty were the best, and the people of the Great Ming Dynasty were the most advanced race. Then, the 2 Opium Wars completely woke the Chinese people up. It turned out that we weren't the most advanced. It turned out that the Europeans had almost robbed the whole world. It turned out that we were already far behind. Then what were we doing? Didn't we know? We knew. Since the Tang Dynasty, China had been the center of the world. During the Song Dynasty, the southeast coast was full of Arab merchant ships. At that time, the Song Dynasty had begun to transform from a primitive natural economy to a market economy. It was even more so during the Zhou Ming Dynasty. When Jianghu went to the Western Ocean, who didn't admire him? Many countries were proud to be able to pay tribute to the Great Ming Dynasty. But that was it. When the Great Ming Dynasty entered the Yingzong Dynasty, it was equivalent to entering the middle of the Ming Dynasty. After that, it was a downward slope. In the end, it was covered by history and was ruled by a group of Tatars who only had millions of people. How sad it was to think about it. If Yang Chendong stopped now, he couldn't guarantee that his descendants wouldn't be destroyed one day, and they wouldn't be ruled by other foreign races. In order for that day to not appear, he had to work harder now. For example, when the world was unified and the Han people became the rulers, even if his descendants failed to live up to expectations and lost the world, the people who could replace them would definitely be Han people. It could be considered as meat rotting in a pot. Not many people could understand his thoughts because they had never experienced it before, so they couldn't think of it. Yang Chendong was different. History had already told him everything. When he was young, he had thought that if one day he had the ability, he would definitely let those foreign races know that the nobility of the Han people was not to be blasphemed. He would also not forgive those people for their actions. He could not forgive the foreign races for invading China when it was declining. He could not forgive the tolerance of China for being used as an opportunity for them to make a comeback. He couldn't forgive them for leaving behind a mess every time they came and left. He could not forgive their betrayal, their despicable actions that were worse than pigs and dogs. As early as the era of Confucius, Zhou Wang Han was forced to the brink of destruction by the war hounds. The western capital Chang'an fell and King Ping moved the capital to Luoyang, barely surviving the crisis. It was in that year that countless Chinese women were humiliated by the barbarians. Their blood was stained with tears and their corpses were a warning to us, warning us not to be merciful to the foreign races. The results of the Spring and Autumn War, taking advantage of the internal divisions of China, the Xiongnu flourished and led the barbarians to invade China. They burned, killed, and plundered, committing all kinds of crimes. This blood debt had been settled for many years, so it was time to settle it. And this settlement work would be completed by him. As for those who said that he was militaristic, that he killed people like scything flax, that he ostracized the foreign races, that he didn't have the magnanimity of a large country, that he didn't have a broad mind, that was up to them. Yang Chendong had his own principles, and now that he had the ability, he had to do everything he wanted to do. He had to do it to the best of his ability, to the extreme. Chen Bo left in the end. He was removed from his position as the commander of the Far Eastern Army, but there was no bitterness on his face. On the contrary, he was excited by Yang Chendong's words about developing the Far Eastern region, because this proved that his time had come. 2 days later, Tian-Hu won the battle and brought the captive Mongolian cavalry and Belinsky's caravan to Al City. Chen Bo knew about Belinsky. This person had a good head for business and his business was very big. In the past Al City, he could be considered one of the top merchants. Of course, he would not forget that it was this person who instigated the 4th Division's commander, Tang Sheng, to attack the Far Eastern Army. Now that he heard that this person had been captured, he quickly went to find Yang Chendong. He wanted this person to die and take revenge for the thousands of soldiers who had sacrificed themselves. Chapter 1395. When Chen Bo arrived at the governor's mansion, he saw Belinsky standing in the reception hall, meeting with Yang Chendong. Yang Chendong sat high above and looked at Belinsky with great interest. He was the only one standing in the middle of the field. On his left was Beta Persei, and below him were Tian-Hu, the 1st Cavalry Division's division commander Temu, as well as the Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division's division commander Dai Qua and the others. After Chen Bo arrived, Dai Qua and the others immediately greeted him. Then he stood together with them and listened to Belinsky, who was standing in the center of the room, speak with fervor and assurance. This Belinsky was quite capable. In terms of language, he could speak Chinese, Russian, and Mongolian dialects. At this moment, he was speaking very fluent Chinese, which did not sound awkward, about some of the strange stories in Siberia and some of the things he had encountered in the mountains. Belinsky's face was very calm, and he even introduced himself proudly, King Wunan of Damyang, this humble one's home is in Siberia, and I've seen many Mongolian troops burning and looting everywhere. They're a group of bandits, and they only know how to snatch good things. Of course, in their eyes, anything that is useful is a good thing. They really look like they haven't seen the world. When he was working with the Mongolian army, his words were full of flattery. He said things like the Mongolian army was the strongest army in the world, and the Mongolians were the noblest people in the world. However, when it came to belittling them, he did not give them any face at all. Those who did not know would think that he had a deep grudge with the Mongolian army. In fact, in the entire Siberia, Hulahan is not the only Mongolian cavalry. As far as this humble one knows, there are 7 or 8 other forces of different sizes. The only difference is that compared to Hulahan, they're poorer and weaker. Apart from that, there are also a few native Russian tribes. Some of them have become quite powerful and have their own protection teams. If it weren't for the fact that they lack weapons and battle experience, they wouldn't be much weaker than the Mongolian cavalry in terms of numbers. Respected King Wunan of Daimyang, this humble one can contact these people, and we've done business with them in the past, so we have some friendship. As long as you give the order, this humble one can bring your greetings to them. I'm sure that at that time, everyone can form an alliance to deal with the Mongolian cavalry. Honorable King Wunan of the Great Ming Dynasty, this lowly one has traveled to various places as a merchant. I am very clear about where there are small paths and where there is a main road through which an army can march. If your majesty needs, this lowly one can present a self-drawn map at any time. It will certainly play a big role in your majesty's control of the situation there in the future. Respected King Wunan of Daimyang, this humble one, Belinsky was like a long-tongued woman who didn't know what fatigue was. He kept his mouth open for more than an hour, to the point that his saliva was flying everywhere and his lips were starting to crack. Finally, he shut his mouth. Perhaps there were still some things that he hadn't said, but based on his experience, he had already said a lot. This was enough to please this young bugnom of Gojoseon. As for taking out everything in his heart, only a fool would do such a thing. Since the two of them were working together, he had to keep some trump cards. Otherwise, how could he fight for the initiative in the future? Seeing that Belinsky had finally shut his mouth, Yang Chendong smiled and nodded with satisfaction. Then, he looked at Ba Daojiang and said, "Take him away. He's tired. Don't let him talk too much. Let him draw out the map of Siberia that he knows." "Yes," Ba Daojiang replied. He had already seen the meaning in Yang Chendong's eyes. He had to properly entertain this foreign profiteer and dig out all the things in his head. At the very least, he had to make sure that he wouldn't cooperate. Under all kinds of torture, he wasn't worried that he wouldn't open his mouth. Ba Daojiang agreed, but Belinsky didn't understand. He raised his right hand and shouted, "Wait, respected King Wunan of Daimyang, you haven't said how we should cooperate." "Cooperate? Why should we cooperate?" Yang Chendong laughed as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world. "You don't want to cooperate? If you don't cooperate, why should I draw a map for you?" A trace of panic appeared on Belinsky's face. When he was talking about himself, he didn't say where he came from, but I. Perhaps this was his true thought. In his heart, he did not respect Yang Chendong that much. It was only because the situation was not as good as Yang Chendong that he had to say this. "You know how to draw a map." Seeing that Belinsky still wanted to make a fair deal with him at this time, Yang Chendong laughed loudly. He was confident that after Ba Daojiang made his move, the other party would soon know why the flowers were so red. At that time, he would say what he knew, and those who didn't, he would talk nonsense. Yang Chendong's eyes revealed a look of disdain. He was treating Belinsky as a captive, which made the merchant unable to remain calm. He was originally a little flustered, but now he shouted, "No, you can't treat me like this. I'm here to discuss business with you. If you do this, it will make me disappointed." "Wrong, you're not here to discuss business with this king. You're this king's captive. You were captured by Commander Tianhu. Everyone can testify to this." Yang Chendong couldn't allow the other party to slander the reputation of the 5-star army. Although they killed people like flies, they still had their reputation. He would still keep his word to his friends. Belinsky suddenly remembered that he was indeed brought here by Tianhu. Although he chose not to resist the 5-star army's cavalry, and even wanted to use the opportunity to meet Yang Chendong to prove his ability and practical value. However, it was also true that he was a captive. From the looks of it, he had miscalculated. He couldn't use his status as a captive as an excuse. He rolled his eyes and shouted again, "I'm a big merchant of the Russian tribe. I have many powerful friends in Siberia. If Bugnam of Gojosian wants to harm me, do you think it will anger them? Once they join forces with the powerful Mongolian cavalry, I'm afraid Arching will change hands a second time." Belinsky's face was full of threat as he spoke. He was just short of saying, "Uncle B is very angry, and the consequences will be very serious." "Are you threatening me?" Yang Chendong was stunned at first, and then he looked up to the sky and laughed. The other high-ranking officers of the 5-star army in the other halls couldn't help but laugh out loud as if they had heard the funniest joke in the world. Belinsky blushed as he looked at everyone. Although he didn't know what he had said wrong, he knew that these people were looking down on him when he saw how they were laughing. He thought that if he didn't argue now, he would be captured by the ferocious 5-star army. His life would be worse than death, so he needed to save himself. Just as everyone was laughing, he suddenly shouted, "Don't think that I'm joking. Let me tell you, many tribes are still waiting for me to do business with them. Without me, they won't have a trade route. They will get angry and become enemies with you. How about this, let me go immediately, and I'm willing to donate all my wealth. I will go back and tell those tribes that the 5-star army is friendly and that Bugnam of Gojosian is great. I guarantee that they won't have any ideas about you." It was half a threat and half a plea. When things didn't develop as he expected, Belinsky really panicked. He was afraid of death because he had money. He was more afraid of death than anyone else. When he realized that money couldn't save his life or bring him glory, his heart was in a mess. "Oh, you still want to continue trading with those people? Do they have money?" Yang Chendong finally asked with interest. His efforts didn't go to waste. Belinsky wasn't afraid of being asked questions, but he was afraid that the other party would ignore him. He immediately became spirited and said, "Respected Bugnam of Gojosian, although they don't have money, they have things that we can trade with. For example, they live in the mountains all year round, so they have good tiger skin, tiger bones, tiger penis, tiger meat, ginseng, and all kinds of animal fur. They are all good things and are very valuable outside." "Oh, they have good things, so it's worth it to trade with them." Yang Chendong nodded in satisfaction. Then his gaze fell on Belinsky and said, "But you don't have to make such a trade. Our Xianxia has many excellent merchants. You just need to tell us the locations of those tribes. As for your assets, they were seized and will definitely be confiscated. Also, you colluded with Tang Sheng and the others to destroy our Archeng and kill this king's people. This debt needs to be settled. Alright, take him away and treat him well. Make him spit out everything in his stomach. If he doesn't say anything, just kill him." Yang Chendong waved his hand impatiently. Ba Daojiang, who had been waiting at the side, strode forward and lifted Belinsky, who weighed more than 50 kilograms, out of the hall. Even after they left the hall, Belinsky was still screaming like a pig being slaughtered. "You can't do this to me. Otherwise, you'll definitely attract the anger of the other tribes. You'll definitely regret it." No one took Belinsky's threat seriously. Regardless of whether it was the Mongol or Russian soldiers, if they didn't come, why would the 5-star army look for them? If they surrendered, everything would be fine. Those who were guilty would be punished, and those who weren't would be given land to farm. They would be squeezed dry. Chapter 1396. Thank you to Moral Student 609, G. Pingon, and Blazing Flame for their monthly votes. Thank you to Langzi. Over the years, who had the 5-star army feared on the battlefield? After Belinsky was taken away, the hall became much quieter. However, seeing the excitement on the faces of Chen Bo and the others, it was clear that they were happy to treat someone who had brought disaster to the Far Eastern army like this. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yang Chendong also decided to talk about the problems of merchants. Before, the Far Eastern province had been busy with two things. One was building a city, and the other was reclaiming land. As for the matter of merchants, it had been ignored. This was not to say that merchants were not important, but before they had a place to live and food to fill their stomachs, who would have time to do business? With a light cough, Yang Chendong shifted everyone's attention to himself. He said, "Without agriculture, there is no stability, and without merchants, there is no wealth." This king does not need to say more, everyone knows this. If the Far Eastern province wants to become powerful, it cannot avoid using trade routes. Later, this king will send a telegram to encourage some Yangxia merchants to come and develop here. When the time comes, everyone will have to cooperate. Understood? Yes. Yang Chendong's words were equivalent to an order. Everyone nodded in agreement. In this era, merchants were not looked down upon. They were seen as people who reaped without sowing. Unscrupulous merchants were what people generally thought of them. Yang Chendong did not agree with this point of view. It was too arbitrary to say that merchants were lowly based on the fact that they only cared about profits. Wasn't it said that all merchants in the world came for profits, and all merchants went for profits? Back in the pre-Qin era, people had this understanding. Why did everyone still think that only merchants cared about profits? In his opinion, it was not merchants who cared about profits, but everyone in the world. It was necessary to allow, prevent, guide, restrict, and use at the same time. Just like you the great controlling the flood, it was better to guide it than to block it. We can develop commerce, we can develop industry, we can liberate the productive forces, we can liberate the mind and everything that can be liberated. Yangxia cannot do without commerce, and even more so cannot take commerce lightly. On the contrary, commerce and agriculture should be placed on the same level of importance. The only difference was that it was based on agriculture and focused on commerce. For the places that we can't go for the time being, we can let the merchants be the vanguard. Through the merchants, we can control everything in those countries, and we can control everything in the merchants. Some people would think that capturing captives and serving the corvée is inhumane, not benevolent and righteous enough, and not enough to show the demeanor of Yangxia. In the face of these doubts, Yang Chendong threw them aside for the time being. Innovation meant that he had to go through a process from not understanding to understanding. In this process, he did not intend to listen to other people's opinions. In his mind, there were too many successful experiences of the later generations. He just needed to use them and did not need to prove them. Since that was the case, why would he need to listen to other people's opinions that were not correct? With the momentum of his own words, Yang Chendong passed the decision to develop the Far Eastern region in the future. This was the benefit of him building his own empire. If he believed that something was right, then there was no need to discuss it with others, and there was no need to listen to other people's opinions. Usually, only the founding emperor could enjoy this kind of treatment. Even in the second generation, it was difficult to do things so happily. From time to time, there would be people who would use the ancestral rules and regulations to stop the wise ruler from doing things that would benefit the people and the country. The matter of the merchants was put aside for now. When the real merchants came, Yang Chendong would have a good talk with them. Not only did he need the merchants to pay more taxes, he also needed to understand the situation of the various forces in Siberia through these merchants. He believed that they would definitely surprise him. After Belinsky was taken away, Yang Chendong got someone to bring over a sand table while everyone was still around. He brought up the matter of building a city and building a road that he had discussed with Chen Bo. Pointing at the sand table, Yang Chendong said loudly, "Considering the Far Eastern region's vast territory and sparse population, it is impossible to completely control this place with just Archeng. This king has decided that apart from Archeng, we will first build 4 cities. They will be in Ding City in the northeast of Mount Aloy. That will become the core of the Far Eastern region's northeast. After the city is built, we will use it as a starting point to develop it. It can also become the granary of the Far Eastern region and provide all kinds of food. Build a Han city south of Archeng, which is near the Stanov Mountains, outer Xing'an Mountains. It will be a huge transit station that will be responsible for the future communication between the Far Eastern region and the Han. Build Tongbei City south of the Han City by the Urguna River, near the present Mo. It will be an important hub that connects the three eastern provinces. In the future, the resources sent from the Yangtze provinces will all pass through here. It will be more convenient and faster, and it will also reduce the losses on the road. Build Alei City west of Archeng in the upper Yansk Mountains. It will be the front line of the military and constantly monitor the various weapons factions in Siberia. Once they have any intentions, it will become the western gate to prevent them from sending troops to the Far Eastern region. This will ensure the safety of the rear and allow for peace of mind. After pointing at the four places, Yang Chendong put down the baton in his hand and looked at everyone present. Choosing these four places wasn't just because of Yang Chendong's whim. It was a combination of distance, geographical location, mineral resources, water sources, and whether the surrounding land was flat or not. It was based on the development of the Far Eastern region in the future. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that even if there was a fake beast, it would be impossible to find a more suitable place. No objections. Everyone shook their heads and said. Among them, except for Chen Bo who had experience in governing a place, the others were all generals. They only knew that wherever Yang Chendong pointed, they would fight there. Good, then it's decided. Yang Chendong also knew that talking too much about this topic was like playing the lute to a cow, so he simply decided to be direct. After choosing the location, it was time to arrange the manpower. During the Zhu Ming dynasty, there was no so-called industry, and technology was not developed. Many things needed a large number of people to complete. For a huge project like building a city, it was unknown how much labor was needed to complete it. For example, in the previous Al city, there were 500,000 Yangtze citizens and tens of thousands of Far Eastern Army soldiers in the city. It only took them a year to build the outline of the city. When the city had a scale, it was already a few years later. Labor was indispensable in building a city. The more, the better. The great man Grandpa Mao once said that there was strength in numbers. This also explained why it was easier to do things with more people. Al City, which had just experienced a riot, now had a population that was 20% less than before. In other words, there were only about 400,000 citizens. Thus, it was easy to imagine how difficult it would be to complete the 4 new cities before the arrival of winter. At least at this time, Chen Bo lowered his head and didn't say anything. He had experienced this kind of thing before, so he knew better than anyone how difficult it would be. On the other hand, the other generals didn't care. They believed in Yang Chendong. Since the 6th young master said that it could be built, it would definitely be built. As for what to do, it was still the same sentence. They only needed to do what he said. No one said anything. Yang Chendong didn't point to anyone to answer his question. He opened his mouth again and said, "Has the food been transported to the city?" This sentence was, of course, directed to Chen Bo. Previously, he had hidden the food because he didn't have much confidence in the safety of Al's city. But now that Yang Chendong was here, Chen Bo naturally felt relieved. He didn't believe that there was anyone in the world who could take something away from the 6th young master. The food has been transported to the city. Now, all the large granaries in the city are full. There are still many stored in the original cellars. Chen Bo said with his chest puffed out and his head held high. This was the only thing he was proud of in the Far East for a few years. Good. The rest of the food doesn't need to be transported to the granaries in the city. Just divide it into 4 and send it to the other 4 cities. Yang Chendong nodded. With enough food, he had enough confidence to do things. Tianhu, when you go back, distribute the horse meat that died in these battles. You can also form a hunting team and go into the dense forests and deep mountains to hunt wild beasts. At the same time, you can also let people go down to fish. Remember, don't take the small fish. Even if you catch them, you have to put them back. If you want to catch, you have to catch the big fish. The next work will be very tiring. It won't be enough to just have food without meat. Yang Chendong looked at Tianhu. But these words were also for everyone to hear. As the saying goes, the emperor doesn't lack hungry soldiers. If you want a horse to run, you have to feed it grass. The horse's mane and tail had to be kept. They were strategic resources. The horse couldn't be wasted. Although it couldn't be made into leather armor, it was still better than nothing. The soldiers of the 5-star army couldn't use it, but it was still a hot commodity if sold to ordinary people. Horse meat was, of course, the most precious. It was shaved off from the bones and mixed with wine to detoxify it. The taste was very good. The bones of the horse couldn't be thrown away. They were thrown into the pot to make soup. It was one of the world's delicacies. Then, the bones were smashed open. The bone marrow inside was so fragrant that it made people bite their tongue. The internal organs of the horse were also good things. The heart, liver, spleen, stomach, and kidneys could all be cooked together. The large intestines and small intestines were also one of the best ingredients. A pot of horse offal was also a famous dish. When the time came, coupled with the game obtained from hunting, the meat problem could basically be solved. This was the case for this year. However, they couldn't always use this method in the future. If they hunted more, the number of wild beasts would naturally decrease. If the fish were too small, they couldn't catch them. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to eat fish in the future. Since they had decided to develop in the long run, it was impossible to not have a long-term vision. The kind of fishing in a pond would only be done when there was no other way. Chapter 1397. After the food problem was solved, Yang Chendong's next speech revolved around 3 major points. First, build 4 cities to ensure that everyone could live in the cities and have their own houses to keep warm before the winter snowfall. Second, build roads. The roads between the 5 cities, including Archeng, had to be built so that 3 carriages could pass side by side without congestion. Only in this way could they ensure the smooth flow of information and ensure that if one side was in trouble, there would be reinforcements from all sides. Third, continue to cultivate wastelands. The commander of the new Second Army that followed Yang Chendong not only escorted a large amount of supplies and tens of thousands of soldiers, but also millions of Yang Xie's people. The more people there were, the more food they needed. If there wasn't enough land, they wouldn't even be able to solve the problem of food and clothing. How could they talk about development? It should be mentioned here that the Zhou Ming dynasty still hadn't completely solved the problem of the people's bellies. This wasn't because they didn't work hard, but because the difference between the output of the land and the food that the people needed was too big. For example, in the current Great Ming dynasty, other than potatoes, 1 mu of land could only produce a little more than 1 dan of grain per year. But how much grain could an ordinary young man eat in a year? A full 5 dan. In other words, 5 mu of land was needed to feed a young man. In this way, it would be strange if there wasn't enough grain to eat. Often, people would only be half full. This was also the reason why people at that time always looked sallow and emaciated. In contrast, the reason why Yang Xie didn't lack grain was because the land was large enough. Compared to their small population, the proportion of land was still very high. Secondly, they had high-yield crops like potatoes, sweet potatoes, and corn. These crops could easily produce 7 to 8 dan, 10 dan, or even 20 dan of grain per year. The emergence of these crops greatly alleviated the problem of Xianxia's lack of grain. Not only that, they could also be sold to the outside world. This was all because they had a good foundation. In addition, Xianxia had built many greenhouses. Even in winter, there were still vegetables to eat. This made many Xianxia territories no longer have the concept of no vegetables in winter. Naturally, food was not a problem. Yang Qindong proposed 3 general directions and began to arrange the work. As the governor of the Far Eastern region, Chen Bo was naturally responsible for the construction of the 4 cities. Tian Hu's 1st Cavalry Army was responsible for the defense of the battlefront, hunting in the forest, and fishing in the water. In short, he was responsible for the supply of meat. The new 2nd Army's 1st Cavalry Army was responsible for the reclamation of the land and the construction of winter greenhouses. Yang Qindong would personally oversee the construction of the roads. He also wanted to take advantage of the time when the roads were being repaired to take a look at the mines and minerals in the area. He wanted to prepare the raw materials for the construction of the factories in the future. After the meeting, everyone received their tasks and began to get busy. At the same time, the first batch of laborers was brought to the 4 cities in batches. Chen Bo personally led them, and the Far Eastern Army soldiers were responsible for escorting them to the 4 cities. These laborers were mainly Mongolian captives. Other than that, there were also soldiers from the Far Eastern Army's 4th Cavalry Division. They had followed Tang Sheng onto the wrong path, and now it was time for them to redeem themselves. There were also people like Qi Wu, Zhang Mian, and Li Dei who had joined Tang Sheng later on. It must be said that they had been wronged. They had made the wrong choice at the last moment, and now, they had become criminals. They needed to serve in the military and return to their original identities. Other than these laborers, Yang Qindong also allowed the people of the Far Eastern region and the various tribes to participate. As long as they worked, whether it was building cities, repairing roads, or reclaiming land, they would receive corresponding rewards. After that, they would use the Chinese currency printed by Xianxia to buy food and daily necessities from the 5 cities. These people could also apply to join the Yang faction, but they needed to apply in advance. After that, their performance would depend on their performance. If they proved that there were no problems within 3 months to half a year, they would be issued a special identity certificate issued by the Yang faction. With this certificate, they would be considered good citizens. Mobilizing the people and making them work for one's own use, this was the successful experience of the later generations. However, it was still a first, and once the news came out, it attracted a lot of discussion and influence. As long as the people lived under the leadership of any faction, they would need to serve in the military. It's free labor, just because it's your job. If they did not perform well during this period, they would be scolded and beaten. This was regarded as a matter of course by the people. In the Xianxia faction, not only was this exempted, but if you were willing to work, you could also receive a high wage. Some people calculated that if 2 people in a family of 5 were willing to work to earn wages, then they would be able to support the family and ensure that the 5 of them would not starve. If 3 people were willing to work, then they would be able to eat their fill and wear warm clothes. Although it was still far from a well-off life, it was still considered an ordinary family. At the end of the year, there would still be some savings. Therefore, when this policy began to spread, especially by the local people like Nikolai who supported the 5-star army, more and more Russian people who were hiding in the mountains began to come out and rushed to the nearest Xianxia city. Never underestimate the power of the people. Especially under Yang Qindong's proposal, all the labor paid would not be calculated by the day, nor by the month, but by the value of the labor. In other words, the people who could work would earn more, and the people who could not work would earn less. A contract responsibility system was implemented. In this way, the enthusiasm of the people was greatly aroused. Not only did the people earn more money and live a better life, but it also increased the speed of the construction of the 4 cities and the development of the wasteland. When Chen Bo heard the progress of the work from his subordinates, he was stunned. If this method could have been used during the construction of Arl City, the city would have been a completely different sight now. Of course, this was just Chen Bo's imagination. Some of the innovations were not something he could think of. He did not have Yang Chendong's influence, nor did he have his decisiveness. If the same thing was done by him, when some of the policies were implemented, it would inevitably lead to all kinds of discussions and doubts. In short, the reforms were not something that could be changed by just anyone. It also depended on the specific strength of the person who implemented it. Half a month later, the commander of the mercenary corps finally arrived at Al City. Not only did they bring 1 million Yangxia people with them, but they also brought all kinds of rare materials. For example, explosives to blow up mountains, cement to pave roads, and so on. At this point, the entire Far Eastern region fell into a heated atmosphere. Everyone's faces were filled with hope for the future. Facts also proved that there were no lazy people in the world. When they felt that the effort and the reward were proportional, everyone would unconsciously unleash their potential and do everything well. When small things were done, they would become big things when put together. The development of the Far Eastern region entered the fast lane. It was even faster than Yang Chendong imagined. Not only did the people of the Far Eastern region respond positively, but the tribes hiding in the mountains also came out. Even the people of Siberia who heard the news crossed thousands of mountains and rivers to come here. They wanted to have something to eat, to not be frozen in winter, and to have a safe haven. Yang Chendong adopted a reward system for these foreign people who came because of the reputation. Those who came first could only be slaves. After that, they had to work hard and contribute enough to become commoners. In the end, they could get rid of their temporary identity card and get an official identity card of an ordinary citizen. If there were people who performed well, they could be promoted to Han citizen. One of the reward systems was that they could report people who were doing bad things. This way, they could find all suspicious people through supervision and there would not be any loopholes. At the same time, if they were serious about their work, they could often exceed the quota and lead others to do better. They would be seen as role models. Also, if they were to spread rumors, they could attract more people to be used by the 5-star army. These were all meritorious deeds that were of great help to the evaluation. With the perfection of the system and mutual supervision, many people with unknown identities were quickly found out. After the investigation by the Security Bureau, they found that most of them were spies from the Mongolian army and belonged to various forces. There were also a few spies from the large Russian tribes. They doubted the authenticity of the 5-star army building a city in Dali and sent people over to investigate. For such people, Yang Chendong ordered his men to release them. He even asked his men to show them around the city so that they could have a better understanding of what the 5-star army was doing. This would make it easier for them to make the right choice. What made people not know whether to laugh or cry was that there were spies from Baiming and southern Ming among these people. It was really difficult for them to come here from thousands of miles away just to see what the 5-star army was doing. When Beta Persei reported the discovery of spies from the Great Ming Dynasty to Yang Chendong, he could not help but sigh. It seems that both Baiming and southern Ming have already seen me as a great enemy. Forget it, it won't be long before I deal with them anyway. I'll just detain these spies. If they're willing to stay, I'll arrange jobs for them and see what happens. As for those who refuse to change, I'll just kill them. Yang Chendong did not boast that he was a saint. He would never be soft-hearted towards his enemies. If he did not do so, he would not be able to achieve the great goal of the world and the supremacy of the Han people. Chapter 1398. Thank you, Moral Student 609, Yuan Zinan's monthly votes and rewards. Lungzi thanks you. The work in the Far East region was in full swing. The results were much faster than the original plan and all the work was progressing at a high speed. Compared to the changes in the Far East region, under the leadership of Tigers Man and Yuan, the mining work had already started after spring. Because they had already investigated and knew the approximate location of the mines, the mining work went very smoothly. A large amount of the resources needed by the Xianxia were mined. Other than a portion left in the first city, the rest were sent to Qiqian City for effective use. The battle in the Li region also achieved some results. The most important thing was taking down Yi Erqiang's tribe. The newly established New Five armies had also received a public call from Yang Chendong to praise them. The first army led by Bai Shuang also turned a small victory into a big victory in the Li region. After Prime Minister Ali Pu was captured by the intelligence department of the Five-Star Army, King Bao Lide felt that he couldn't do anything by himself. In the end, he made a difficult choice. He submitted to the Timur Empire, which was far away from them, and requested for them to send troops to help him. The actions of the Five-Star Army had already attracted the attention of the Timur Empire. Especially after the new Five-Star Army took down the Yerqiang tribe and sent troops to the Yusang region. Although they hadn't really fought, from the direction of the troops, a huge battle was unavoidable. Without the lips, the teeth would feel cold. Even if it was to ensure his own safety, the Timur Empire couldn't watch the Five-Star Army grow stronger. At this moment, the actions of the Five-Star Army were very similar to their ancestors. Genghis Khan and his descendants attacked and occupied one after another. In the end, the land was so big that people didn't dare to look at it directly. Their territory spanned from the Irtysh River in the west to the Sea of Okhotsk in the east. In the east, they owned the northeastern part of the Korean peninsula. In the southwest, they included the Kashmir region, Bhutan, Sikkim, and other places in the southern foot of the Himalayas, northeastern Myanmar, and northern Thailand. They swept through Russia and Ukraine, reaching Kiev, the current capital of Ukraine, and the Danube River. They destroyed the Germanic army in Hungary and forced their way to Venice in Italy. It had a land area of 44 million square kilometers. The performance of the Five-Star Army led by Yang Chendong was even better. No one was willing to see such a huge monster appear. It could be imagined that it wouldn't take long for the Timur Empire to make a move. As for whether they would send an emissary to dissuade them or directly dispatch troops, that would depend on the development of the battlefield. Let's talk about the navy. Since they went to sea in March, they have been invincible all the way. The battleships were equipped with the most advanced cannons. In addition, the new ships were much faster than the ships of other forces. The Cold Front Navy was almost invincible. In just 2 months, they had conquered Sumatra in the south and Manchuria in the north, completing the task of controlling the Straits of Malacca. Following which, they headed straight for Sri Lanka, following the route that Jianghu took when he went to the Western Ocean. The difference was that the Cold Front Navy was much more ferocious. Wherever they went, there was either submission or death. There was no third choice. The situation was very good. Yang Chendong, who was in the Far East, was relieved and wholeheartedly directed the road construction. With Beta Persei, an all-round deputy, Yang Chendong only needed to take care of the general situation. This also gave him more time to look for various minerals. There were some maps in the warehouse that recorded the relevant information. With this, he had already led people to find 3 large mines. Conservatively, one of the iron mines could meet the needs of the Far East for the next 30 years. The rest could also be used to support the armament factory in Qiqian City. When the news was sent back to Qiqian City, several teams of experts quickly set out. The current armament factory was developing very quickly, resulting in a shortage of resources. If they could really solve the problem of raw materials, it could be imagined that the development of the armament factory would soon reach a new level. Time passed month by month. In the 9th month of 1461 AD, good news kept coming. In the 9th month, the 6th Madam, Wuan Xiaoyu, gave birth to Yang Chendong's second son. In the 10th month, Xiao Yuxue gave birth to a son named Yang Jun. A few days later, Dong Xiangxiang gave birth to a daughter named Yang Nua. In the 11th month, Tuoya gave birth to a daughter named Yang Ting. Not long after, Su Maner gave birth to a son named Yang Zhao. In the 12th month, another 2,000 gold pieces were added. They were the pure daughter Yang Xian at the beginning of the month and Huyan's daughter Yang Lin at the end of the year. That's right, the year 1461 was considered a bumper harvest year. This bumper harvest did not only refer to the great progress in various aspects of military and local politics, but also the expansion of the royal family. In 3 months, there were 3 more men and 4 more women. It had to be said that Yang Chendong's ability was very good. After staying in Qiqian City for a few months and working hard, there was finally a return. The only regret was that Yang Chendong could not rush back. At this time, it was snowing heavily in the Far East. The 4 newly built cities could finally be put to use. Although the city walls had been built in a short period of time, the number of houses in the cities was still a little low. Yang Chendong had no choice but to take out the auditorium that was built first. Although it was a little crowded and noisy, the floor of the auditorium was still warm, which brought a sense of joy to all the foreign people who were temporarily staying here. Since young, they had never stayed in such a warm room before. They didn't even dare to think about it. But now, everything had come true. It was no wonder that everyone was so excited. Even when they were squeezed together, no one had any complaints. Including Al City, the appearance of a total of 5 cities brought a ray of warmth to the Far East in the cold winter. After the families of all the soldiers were properly settled, there were no other voices in the army. Especially after Yang Chendong brought up the slogan of making a new contribution, in order to change himself and his family's living conditions, all the soldiers were thinking about one thing, and that was when they could go to war, when they could go to the battlefield, and let them have the opportunity to make contributions and receive rewards. Their fighting spirit was brewing, and they were only waiting for a suitable opportunity to release it. At that time, the fighting spirit of the 5-star army would be unstoppable. The cold winter would pass, and spring would come. At the same time, it brought news from Yang Xie's caravan. The map of the Mongolian army in Siberia had been sent to Yang Chendong. Looking at the 2 cities of Ust Kilima and Greater Ust Koj, Yang Chendong's calm eyes flashed with fighting spirit. After finally finding the 2 main forces of the Mongolian army, Yang Chendong's fist landed on the table. Beta Persei, summon General Tianhu and General Sherbei for a discussion, 1462 AD, end of the 3rd month. The snow had just started to melt, and white snow could still be seen everywhere. The 5-star army had already gathered in Alei City. Soon after, under the command of General Yang Chendong, nearly 100,000 soldiers set off. They brought enough rations and equipment as they left the city. They wanted to make a name for themselves. After hearing the news that the 5-star army had already set off, many of the foreign race youths who stayed in the 5 cities had yearning, envy, and unshakable determination in their eyes. The treatment of the soldiers of the 5-star army was something that they had witnessed during this period of time. Excellent equipment, generous treatment, lofty status, respected social status, all of these were things that made people jealous and envious. They had also joined the army. In the past, they had worked hard for their tribe, and some had worked hard for the Mongolian army. However, that was because they did not have enough food to eat or warm clothes to wear. How could it be compared to working for the 5-star army? The difference in status and treatment caused the 5-star army soldiers to be filled with a sense of honor, and they were filled with the spirit of a master. One could imagine the spirit and fighting ability of this kind of army. It was not something that the Mongolian soldiers who were just trying to make a living could compare to. This kind of army was naturally very attractive. Regretfully, slaves did not have the right to sign up for the 5-star army. At the very least, they had to be commoners. If there were many people signing up, they would need to be commoners. Just like that, many of the slaves who had just joined Xianxia not long ago lost the chance to join the army. Thinking about the treatment of the 5-star army soldiers and the delicious rice and food that they would occasionally help out in the army, one of the slaves could not help but drool. At the same time, he made up his mind to perform well and become a commoner as soon as possible. This way, he would have a chance to join the 5-star army in the next recruitment. Reward system, good treatment, and social status. These were the changes that Yang Chendong had made to the military system. In a subtle way, it solved the problem of the lack of soldiers. Compared to the other factions who moved for the king and shut up for the country, it was much more practical. Everyone had their own selfish motives. When they were respected and their lives were greatly improved, perhaps they would have more thoughts and their realms would increase. However, if someone did not even have enough food to eat or warm clothes to wear, what was the difference between saying loyalty to the king and serving the country? Even if they said these things, how much could they agree with it in their hearts? If they did not agree, how could they be proactive? Thinking about it, one was to be forced to go to war, and the other was to want to make military contributions and perform well on the battlefield. If these two armies met, what would the result be? Even an idiot would be able to guess who would win and who would lose. Yang Chendong brought the 5-star army with strong fighting spirit and left the Far East region, bringing the envy and yearning of countless people into Siberia. At the end of March, due to the geographical location of Siberia, the weather in Siberia was not as warm as in the south. It was only warm around noon when there was plenty of sunshine. At other times, especially at night, it was still very cold. As the snow melted, the roads became muddy and difficult to walk on. You're tuning in to the UnparalleledSwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.